Hello, welcome to September Leeds PHP, first one after the summer break. Hope you all had a good summer, whatever you did. So this evening we've got two great talks. We'll start off with Oliver Davis doing his talk about upgrading your site to Drupal 9. We'll take a little break at past, just go get a drink, whatever. And then at past we'll begin the next talk about PHP 8. And then afterwards, if you want to hang around, please do. This event is sponsored by BJSS, who are a consultancy based in Leeds and other cities and now other countries as well. Searchability, who are a recruitment agency, and Bruntwood, who usually provide us with a venue for free of charge, but obviously at the moment they don't. We have a Slack now. Please feel free to join that. That's the link for it. We can share that around as well if you need it. Just ask us, I'll share it. But please join that. So Meetup news, we're looking for speakers. We've got slots now for every event for the rest of the year. So please let me know if you've got a talk or you think you might have a talk or there's something that you think you'd like to speak of. Just come and give us a shout if you want to do that. We're always looking for new speakers. And second up, Big Orange Heart. So we're using the Big Orange Heart platform for this event, which is provided by a charity, formerly WP and Up, who deal about mental health and remote working. Really a great charity, and this platform is great as well. I'll just hand over to Dan to talk a bit more about that.
Hugh, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity just to come and have a quick chat with everyone. Just as you mentioned, Hugh, Big Orange Heart is a registered charity. Our mission is to support and promote positive well-being and mental health within the remote working communities. So we're making this platform available. We actually run a number of events ourselves. So obviously we had to transition when we hit the, obviously when COVID kicked in, we had to look at how we could deliver our events to, ensure we were trying to support the ability to reduce social isolation. So we're making this platform available to other meetups, other events that, really align with the mission of the charity. And obviously we're really happy to partner with Leeds PHP to be able to deliver these events. So it's great to see so many of you joining us over in the chats over at live.bigorangeheart.org and over in the social as well. For those of you that aren't aware, if you're on the platform, we do have a link on there that's to the social. The environment is going to be open throughout the whole event. You can go in there and spin up a virtual table, move around, jump into conversations with the community. So please feel free to use as you like.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. As you say, it's a really good thing that you're doing with the charity, and the platform's really good as well. So it's a complete no-brainer to be using it. And thanks for providing it for us.
We really appreciate the opportunity to come and connect with the Leeds PHP community.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, hope you enjoy your night. Speak soon.
Yep. So I'll hand over to Oliver now for his talk.
Let's see. Hopefully we can still see my screen and everything. Hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Cool. Just gonna move some things around on my other screen. So my main screen is here and my laptop screen is down there, and that's where my notes and everything are. So I'm aware that I'm glancing down to my right a little bit there, but yeah, that's where my sort of notes are. So I just popped the link into the chat as well for the link to these slides. These slides are online, so people who go through either follow them as we're going through now or check them afterwards again. That's fine. Thanks Leeds PHP for having me do this talk. It's a relatively new talk for me. Drupal 9 is pretty new in itself. I did it once to the Drupal New York group last month, so this is my second go at it. So it's probably still a bit sort of rough around the edges, but we'll see how we go. And yeah, just thanks again for inviting me to have me do this talk, and thanks as well to the organisers. I've been organising meetups for a few years myself, both Drupal and PHP meetups, so I know how much work goes behind the scenes to organise events like this. So yeah, thanks to the organisers for organising these events as well. A little bit about me. My name is Oliver Davis. I'm based in South Wales. I'm a senior software engineer at Invika. I'm OP Davis pretty much everywhere online, Twitter, on Drupal.org, on GitHub, pretty much everywhere. And yeah, this is my website, oliverdavis.uk, where I blog about PHP and Drupal and Ansible and Tailwind and a whole mixture of things. So this is a tweet that I sent out just before I was going to do this talk for the New York user group. And just before then, it just been 10 years of me working full-time with Drupal and with PHP. So it's been, I think, about 12 years in total, maybe 13 years in total. But yeah, this was quite a little milestone for me, so I thought I'd send a tweet out. But yeah, I've been around the Drupal open source PHP community for some time. Just for some context, I started, it was beginning of Drupal 6, I think. Drupal 5 is still a thing. Something I was going to mention as well, so this is a PHP user group. If people maybe want to put in the chat just like a yes or no, if you use Drupal or any sort of knowledge of Drupal, and maybe which versions as well. If you are using Drupal, I'll know a bit more about the audience here. So yeah, I've gone through various sort of Drupal 5 to 6 migrations and 6 to 7 and then 7 to 8 migrations. So yeah, I've got a little bit of experience in this area of doing these sort of migrations. So before we start talking about Drupal 9, I'll talk a little bit about Drupal 7 and the versions before that and how the release cycle for those worked there. So there's one long-running development branch. So when the core team started working on Drupal 7, they made a new 7.x branch. Every commit for Drupal 7 has gone onto that branch since. The most recent version is 7.7.3. So I did update that just before this talk. I guess Netlify hasn't built that yet, but 7.73 was released last week. So basically it's been 73 stable major versions of Drupal 7. And because of that, there aren't any sort of new or big features as part of that. Like everything went into the main release. All the new features went into the first release. Everything has been sort of maintenance and bug fixes and everything since then, because compatibility. And this meant that if you wanted to commit something to core, like a new feature, then you'd have to wait for the next major version to roll around. So that meant it could take a long time for your things to get committed into core, which isn't great. If you're submitting a thing and you're really passionate about that thing, you want it to get in and be committed and usable as soon as possible. That wasn't really the way it worked. Drupal 8 release cycle and the Drupal 9 release cycle is quite different. So we introduced semantic versioning for core. I say we as in the Drupal community, the core maintainer community. I've committed a few patches to core myself, but I'm not one of the main maintainers or anything. So when I say we, I mean Drupal community, we. Introduced semantic versioning for core, which means that every 6 months is a new minor version. So we released Drupal 8, and then 6 months after that, we had 8.1 and 8.2 and 8.3, etc. We're currently on 8.9, and 8.9.6 was released a couple of weeks ago as well. And then every month we get a patch release. So new features every 6 months, bug fixes are every month. So this means that if we want to include something new, like a new feature, the maximum amount of time that it can be before it getting committed and available is 6 months, which is a lot better than what it was previously. And there've been some really interesting things that have been committed to Drupal 8 during that time, things like the layout builder, new base themes, new admin themes, all this sort of new stuff that wasn't possible to include into core before. This means that there's multiple versions of core available at any given time. So right now we have 8.8 and 8.9. That's the two, one being the most recent version of Drupal 8, and then the one prior, both supported. We've got Drupal 9 itself being supported and also 7 at the same time. So the main sort of change here, which I think I'm going to talk about next, is that it's really changed from a it will be ready when it's ready type release to it will be released on this day, and whatever's been committed will be shipped at that point. So here's a graph, or a graph. It's a graph, I guess, an image of the release cycle. So this was a little bit out of date now. So this is showing 8.5, 8.6. The same thing still applies. Bump the numbers up in your mind. So what we've got is this overlapping sort of branch structure now. So rather than one really long branch that's sort of covered, one version is becoming supported, and as that's being phased out, the new one is being released. This, along with other things, I think we've sort of inherited from the Symfony ecosystem and various other projects. So this should be pretty familiar for people outside of the Drupal bubble. So the people who haven't really used Drupal that much in the chat, this might seem familiar. So Drupal 8 versus Drupal 9, there's no new functionality at all. So whereas before we had to wait for the next major release to get all the new functionality in, there isn't any in Drupal 9 at all. But during the Drupal 8 release process, we were adding new things in, like the layout builder, like the new admin theme, etc. And whilst we were doing that, we were deprecating the old code. So things were being tagged as deprecated and triggering errors that we'll see examples of later on. And as we were updating through the minor versions, then we, in theory, should be updating the code as we go. But that code has now been removed in Drupal 9, which is why we've got a break and change. The PHP required version has increased, so we're now running 7.3 minimum for Drupal 9, which is awesome. And the major versions of dependencies have been updated as well. So Drupal 8 was based on Symfony 3, and then Drupal 9 is bumping up to Symfony 4. So we're having to keep up to date with all the dependencies. So anybody, again, like the non-Drupal people would be in the audience. In Drupal 7 and earlier, everything pretty much was written by Drupal developers, with the exception of jQuery, probably, that was bundled in there. Drupal 8 was a really big turning point, and when we started adopting other people's code, adopting tools like Composer, pulling in various Symfony components, like there's maybe 12 or 13 or 14 at this point. So it's a real sort of big shift, and became very, started utilizing dependencies and third-party code a lot more. So we're having to keep up to date with those now, as those are updated. So previous upgrade issues, in my opinion anyway, these are the main issues for me. And the main one is lots of breaking changes. So from anybody who's done a Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 migration, because of the inclusion of the Symfony components and the move from a pretty functional global scope setup to using primarily object-oriented code and dependency injection and service containers and all these sort of things, there are a lot of changes that need to be made to move your site from 7 to 8. Yeah, a lot of changes, and I think that was a bit of a killer for some people. Jeff Gerling, another Drupal, wrote a blog post recently about this and titled something like "Did Backwards Compatibility Kill Drupal?" or something like that. So I suggest you go and read that if you're interested in that. But for me, that was a big thing. You know, we're working on a project, everything works in Drupal 7, but now we essentially to rebuild everything afresh and then migrate the data across into a new platform. And then core was released, and then contrib takes time to catch up. So there are thousands, probably thousands and thousands of plugins and modules and themes that we can add to our Drupal projects, which are in their own right separate open source projects. So when Drupal 7 was released, the main thing that springs to mind was the views module, which is one of the sort of key modules people use on every site, more or less. It's in core now for Drupal 8. But it took around 6 months for the Drupal 7 compatible views module to be released. So there was a 6 months of gap where Drupal 7 was out, but no one really wanted to use it yet because views module wasn't there. And that's just, you know, one example. That's the one that sticks out in my mind. So there have been some improvements in the contrib space. From 8 to 9, there are minimal code changes required. In some cases, if maintainers have been keeping up to date with the deprecations in core, there's only a one-line change to make everything compatible. So rather than declaring it's a Drupal 8 module, it can be an Drupal 8 or Drupal 9 module at the same time, which is pretty cool. So yeah, in most cases, I think it was even something like 70 or 80% of the modules in contrib were Drupal 9 compatible out of the box once that one line had been changed. And the majority of the others were Drupal set message had been replaced by the messaging service. So rather than having to rewrite your whole module, the amount of changes needed to make it Drupal 9 compatible was very, very minimal. And as I said, single releases can support multiple versions of core. So as of, I think, Drupal 8.8, you could have a module that's compatible with 8.8, 8.9, and 9 at the same time, which is quite different to what we've had before in this sort of space. And more recently, semantic versioning has also been enabled for contributed projects. So typically, the Drupal 7 versions of modules would be 7.x-1.0, for example. And that was the same in Drupal 8, but it makes no sense to have that sort of core prefix version there if it's applying to 8 to 9 at the same time. So that's now been dropped, and we can start tagging 1.0.0 versions of contributed modules as well, which is pretty cool. Here's an example of one of the Drupal project pages for a module or a theme, I guess. I can't remember which one it was. But you can see here there's two releases. The top one is the Drupal 8 version 2.7. This requires 8 and 9 at the same time. So I say you can work with both. But then what's also happened here is someone has tagged a 2.0.0 release. So they've made a new version with the semantic versioning, which is pretty awesome. So as I said, the difference here is really the deprecated code created before. So essentially what we needed here is, the newer code, as changes have been made to Drupal 8, we found new ways of doing things and then marked the old ways of doing things as being deprecated and replacing the internals with the new way of doing things. So if we want to move to Drupal 9, we need to make sure that our code isn't using any of the code that's been removed. Okay, yeah, so this is an example of this. So this is the Drupal set message function. This is used all the time in Drupal to display a little message at the top of the page. And you can see here in the second line, we've got this @trigger error, and that's just going to write a message into our log and say Drupal set message has been deprecated as of 8.5. We can still use it after 8.5, but we'll still keep getting this message. But it will be removed before Drupal 9. So if we want to move to Drupal 9, we have to make sure that we're not using this function anymore because it won't be there. Then the second half, we see we're calling a messenger service, which is the new way of doing it. And that's how we need to do it in our new code. So how do you find this deprecated code? There's one tool called Drupal Check, which was written by a developer called Matt Glauman. And this is an extension on PHP Stan, which will run static analysis on your code and check for correctness. So it checks it if things don't exist, or classes that don't exist, including deprecation errors and more. And this is the link to the GitHub repo for that project. So the project suggests you install it globally through Composer. This is how we do that. And then you run a command like this, so Drupal check, and then the path to the code that we want to check. So in this case, this is my custom modules directory for this project. And this is an example of what we get. This is just an example from a project that I've done called Ansible, which is a Drupal Ansible demo. So when I've done a talk on deployments with Ansible, this is the code base I used to demo that with. And this was Drupal 8 until quite recently. And it's got one really simple custom module that displays that message using that Drupal set message example that we saw. So I run this code base, the tool on the code base, and it come back with this one thing to fix. So that's one way of doing it. Another way is using a module called upgrade status. And on its project page, there's this table of features and then what's in Drupal check and what's in the upgrade status module. So it's arguable at this point, or this table suggests that upgrade status is more fully featured, at least at this point. As I said, Drupal's using a number of Symfony components, including the PHP unit bridge. And this includes a deprecation helper. So if you've got this enabled, it will display deprecation notices in the test output. So here's an example of that. After running automated tests, like one test with 4 assertions in it, which is, you can see the little green bar there. But then below that, it says remaining deprecation notice is 1, and it gives us our deprecation notice. So it's the same message that we saw in that trigger error function call is displayed at the bottom of our page. So that's another way of doing it. How do we fix a deprecation? We can see the Drupal set message function has been removed. We just need to replace it with the Drupal messenger service in this case, and then call the add message method with the same text. So it's sort of a find and replace, find everything that doesn't exist anymore and replace it with the new way of doing it. Okay, let's talk about Composer. It's a PHP meetup, so I assume everyone's pretty much familiar with Composer. But just in case you're not, it's a dependency management tool for PHP. It's been my preferred way to manage Drupal code bases for some time. Drupal 8, because we were pulling in all these dependencies from Symfony and Zend, etc., the core team started using Composer to manage Drupal core's own dependencies. And then as a result of that, people then started adopting Composer as a way of managing their entire code base. So prior to that, you'd download a zip file or a tarball, or use internal sort of Drupal tools like Drush Make or Drush itself to download code straight from Drupal.org. But I'm very much in the Composer camp and the tool. So Composer JSON file will list our dependencies and our versions, and then the lock file. Again, I'm sure more people are aware of this in the PHP space. The Composer lock file will store all the dependencies and install versions. And there are separate packages. So there is a Drupal/core package, but there are also 3 separate ones. So one is the core recommended, which is the one that I tend to use. There's one for core dev that includes all the core development dependencies like PHP unit and code sniffer, etc. And then a core Composer scaffold, which downloads all the files that you don't like, things like your index.php and your robots file. It will install those for you, or copy them from somewhere in core. So you don't need to store these things inside your code base anymore, which is lovely and awesome. This is how we use Composer to install a module. So we use Composer require. All the modules are inside the Drupal namespace. There's a Drupal Composer facade that's available on Drupal.org. And we give it the machine name of our module. So admin_toolbar is the machine name of the module. And we're going to say include 2.0 or greater of this module. And once you've done that, we can just run a Composer install, and that will download all the dependencies for our project. If you want to update the admin toolbar, we can just use Composer update to update it. And this is great, like Drush and Drush Make would sort of do this for you. It's better than, or you could run commands like Drush up would sort of do things. But yeah, I like, because I do work with Symfony and a little bit with Sculpin and other PHP projects as well. I really like the consistency of using Composer across the board. And yeah, if you are doing that, always use the no-dev flag in production to prevent your development dependencies from being committed or being available in production. So that can introduce security vulnerabilities. I think we had one very early in the Drupal 8 lifecycle where PHP unit and other dev dependencies were included in the tarball or somehow got onto some production sites. So since then, there's always been this, emphasis on don't make sure you use the no-dev flag in production. So here's an example. Again, this is the Ansible project that I use for my Ansible talk. You can find it on GitHub at this URL. And yeah, here's just a screenshot of that repo. So yeah, this is a talk I do on Drupal 8 and deploy, not so much on Drupal itself, but deploy to use Ansible as a deployment tool for PHP projects in Drupal. So here are the steps I took to upgrade this Drupal 8 project at the point, Drupal 8.8 project at that point to Drupal 9. The first thing I had to do was remove Drush, albeit temporarily. And that's because when I was updating from 8.8 to 8.9, I was getting stuck on 8.9 beta 2 or some sort of early version. And removing Drush seemed to fix that. There's a blog post I wrote after the fact, and I did find a slightly different command to run that seemed to sort of get around it. But to begin, this is what I did the first time around. I then moved from 8.8 to 8.9. So I wanted to make sure that all the code that I've got is, I'm up to date with the deprecation warning, so I know what I need to fix. So there could be, or were, new deprecations added between 8.8 and 8.9. Could probably go from 8.8 to 9 directly, but you're going to miss out on some of those things there. Add the upgrade status module. I then updated the contrib modules using the Drupal 9 compatible versions. So there were a couple of those, I think. And then if you're able to remove any incompatible modules, so as using a module or a profile called config installer, there's no Drupal 9 version for config installer. It's no longer needed as of 8.6 or something. So it's not needed. So I'm just able to remove it from my composer.json file and not worry about it anymore. Had some deprecations of my custom code. So that Drupal set message in that module I needed to update with the messenger service. And then once everything was running on 8.9, I was able to upgrade to 9.0, again using Composer. And then once everything's running on 9, I could remove the upgrade status module because it was no longer needed at this point, and re-edit Drush at that point. Drush, originally I think I had Drush 8 or 9. Drush is the Drupal shell project. It's sort of the CLI for Drupal, interacting with Drupal. I should have said that earlier, sorry. It's a separate, it's not bundled with Drupal itself. There is talk of moving into the core recommended project, but for now it's a separate project completely. So they're also keeping up to date with their own set of dependencies. They also rely on Symfony Console and various other things. So they've released Drush 10. That's fairly recently, probably a little while ago now. But Drupal 9 is compatible with Drush 10, whereas Drupal 8 is not. Drupal 9 is not compatible with Drush 9. So I needed to also bump the version of Drush whilst I was doing this at the same time. So if we go through this sort of screenshot by screenshot, this was me. This is the Drupal upgrade status module, or some output of it. Anyway, you can see here that I'm on 8.9.3, and this is the very sort of top of this page. There's various sections. We'll see the others in a moment. So this is Drupal core and hosting. So 8.9.3 is fine. As I said, the version of PHP that's the minimum requirement is 7.3. So in this example, I'm running 7.4. That's fine. My PHP and Apache and Drush are fine. As I said, minimum version of 10 for this project. So everything's green and everything's good on the core and hosting part of the output. Then there's a section for contributor projects. So in this project, I had just admin toolbar module and then the configuration installer that I already mentioned. And then the one simple message custom module. If you can see this, but there's a little sort of checkbox next to each section. So they're not scanned right now. It says they're 2 not scanned. Scan to find errors. So check the boxes, and there's a scan button at the bottom of this form. And then it's going to say scanning projects, and it's going to do some analysis against those projects, and come back with an error in this case. So yeah, my simple message module is using some deprecated code. It's found 1 error and 1 warning. So by clicking that, I get this little pop-up, which I think is awesome. And there's 2 ways I can go at fixing this problem. And one is using automation. This is really good. So it tells us again what the issue is, and we can use a tool called Drupal Recorder to fix these things automatically. So because a lot of them have say the same version, the same line in the info file needs changing, or this Drupal set message needs changing, and we know how to fix that, or at least we can automate that. So there's this tool called Drupal Recorder that we can use, do it automatically. And during one of the contribution sprints, one of the Drupal events, I want to say recently, probably a little while ago now, somebody ran this Drupal Recorder tool against any contrib project that had opted in. I did it on some of the ones that I maintain, and I got emails or issues opened automatically with patches submitted to them with automatic fixes to make those projects Drupal 9 compatible, which was pretty cool. Oh yeah, of course we can go in and do this manually. So the other thing I had to change was in the .info.yaml file for my module, change it from being a Drupal 8 specific module using the core key to using the core version requirement key, which takes a Drupal 8 or Drupal 9 string. So we need to add the core version requirement to make it Drupal 9 compatible as well. That's all I had to do. Yes, it's a really simple module. It just displays the message at the top of the page, but all I need to do to make it Drupal 9 compatible is change these two things, which I think is pretty cool. Having done that and rescanning, it then comes back with no known errors. So my custom modules in this project are now Drupal 9 ready. There's still a couple of contributed modules. So the admin toolbar module that I was using was 2.0. And at least at that point, I think they fixed this now, but this was confusing to me at the time. It says that this module is ready for Drupal 9, but that version of that module wasn't ready for Drupal 9. So it says there on the side, available update is 2.3. Once I updated to 2.2, I think it was Drupal 9 compatible. So I did need to go in and update that module. The configuration install thing had gone away at this point already. And you can see here now we're running on Drupal 9.0.3 when I did this update. So this was done by changing the version requirements in the Composer JSON file. Again, it looks like Netlify hasn't built the updated version of this slide, which is slightly annoying. And I'm able to run commands like composer update Drupal/core star to update any of the core recommended or dev or composer scaffold projects. So I'm able to do this in sort of two or three lines of composer, maybe 4 or 5 if you include removing drush and everything at the same time as well. This was the pull request I made on this project. You can see that there's only 6 files that have changed, which when I've done these 7 to 8 projects, then we're talking about months or weeks of development work, depending on the complexity, maybe longer than that. And thousands of files being changed and modules being completely rewritten from scratch. So to migrate this whole project, again, it's a simple project. It's just for demos, but 6 files that have changed to make this to move to a new version, major version of Drupal is pretty cool. And out of those 6, 1 is updated. 4 of them, the bottom 4 are all really project specific. So yeah, the composer files have changed. The core extension file is the one that says which modules are enabled. So in this case, I've had to remove that configuration install on a module. And then the bottom 2 are, the next 2 are Ansible. So again, it's just for this project. And then the services file for the simple message module. We'll come on to that in a second. If you look at the right of this screenshot, we can see there's a few thousand lines that have changed and been added. But then most, like 4,000 of those, 4,245 of those are inside the log file. So the vast majority of the changes were inside that file. So yeah, there were some issues that I wasn't expecting. And again, because I do some work with Symfony and some other projects as well, I do try and bring a lot of that stuff back into my Drupal project. So I do write PHP in sometimes a little Symfony-ish way. One of the things is using auto wiring. And after doing the update, I saw this error. So class existence resource not found inside this component. After some Googling, and it was quite obvious after the fact, I needed to install the Symfony config component because that wasn't included with core itself. So by default, it tried to install version 5 of this, but the other core dependencies is based on version 4, so I've specified version 4 for config as well. And then I got this message as well, cannot auto-wire this service because of this. Now, this is something that would have popped up, I think, when I moved from 8.8 to 8.9 as a deprecation. I've definitely seen it before when I've been moving, excuse me. But because I'd moved to Drupal 9 at this point, it was now erroring at this point. So I got around that by doing this. This is my services file before. So I'm using the fully namespace class name. Here's my service name. Say AutoWire true, and it's an event subscriber. And this lives inside the simple message module. It defines services for the simple message module itself. Each module could have this, so it's a modules level thing. So this is how I was doing it before, and to make this work, I needed to add these 2 lines. So I wasn't able to. He wasn't able to infer anyway that this was still the same thing, so I had to add an alias for it. Yeah, that's all I had to do. So those are 2 things that I did hit on my project. If you're not using auto-wiring, I guess you wouldn't have them, but they did come up for me, so I thought it was worth mentioning. And yeah, the big thing with Drupal 9 is that it shouldn't be a big deal at all. So I was able to do this in maybe like an hour or 2, probably, yeah, and compare that to weeks or months or longer to do a 7 to 8 migration is a big difference. And yeah, probably the smallest core update pull request I've ever made. So much so that Drupal 10 is already being discussed or planned. Drupal 10 is going to be released in June 2022. Drupal 9 is going to be end of life in November 23. And these again are to keep up to date with dependencies. So Symfony 4 end of life is November 23 as well. So because of the breaking change in Symfony 4, you need to upgrade to Symfony 5, and you also need to bump Drupal to Drupal 10. That said, we've been told it should be another easy upgrade. So essentially the same steps I've just done, I should be able to do and move to Drupal 10 at some point in the future. If you are using Drupal, I would suggest, or I'd encourage people to be aware of the Drupal Association if you're not already. Disclaimer, I used to be employed by the Drupal Association a few years ago, but they are the non-profit behind the Drupal project. It's a very sort of small team, but yeah, they organize all the DrupalCon conferences. They keep Drupal.org running. Drupal would be a very different project without the DA behind it. So if you're a Drupal user or a Drupal developer, you can become a member of the DA, and it's something like $20 a year or something. Or if your organization is a Drupal organization, you can have organization membership as well. Just keep. I know they were hit quite heavily with COVID, and there's a whole sort of fundraiser thing that went on, and we raised so much money in a certain amount of time. But yeah, I definitely encourage people to become aware of and support the DA if possible. Here are some links just to some of the things that we've talked about during this talk. Yeah, there was an example of I did an example, that bottom link there, which is the Drupal 8 replication example with the PHP unit bridge. And one thing I haven't put in this slide, and maybe I'll add in later on, is this blog post. So after I did this talk with Drupal NYC, I sort of went through it again, sort of with a little bit of a tooth comb, and sort of documented the step-by-step process. So I didn't want to throw commands and things at everybody on slides, but if you do want to come and take a look at things in a bit more detail, then that link is there as well. We got time for some questions, I think. Maybe if not, or if people think of things afterwards. Again, this is my website where you can get in touch with me, or Twitter is probably the best other place. So yeah, people can get in touch with questions afterwards, or people have questions now. That we'll just have a quick look in chat here. Let me see if I can bring it onto the screen actually. Any advice on upgrading a Drupal 7 project? Yeah, Drupal 7, I'd say, is quite different. It's quite a big jump from 7 to 8 and 9. Seems to be, I don't know whether it's worth this. I've had discussions with people where it's worth skipping 8 and going straight to 9. The jump from 8 to 9 is so small, I'm not really sure whether it's much benefit to doing that. When the upgrades are really sort of big upgrades, we did have this, people skipped 7, went from 6 to 8 and skipped out 7. But yeah, the move to 8 to 9 is so small. I don't think there's that much of a benefit there. There are some percentage of modules. It's a little bit, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but there are still some modules that are only Drupal 8 and not Drupal 9 compatible yet. So you may have some modules that are only Drupal 8 at this point. But if you're doing any sort of large build, you might want to start on 8 and move to 9 as part of doing the process. So that will be an option as well. Yeah, I've done a few Drupal 8, 7 to 8 projects, but yeah, they take a lot of planning, and essentially, yeah, they are sort of rebuild and port everything across, and then you're looking at doing data migrations and copying all your data across. I do tend, if you have the chance, maybe you could start writing Drupal 7 code in a very sort of Drupal 80 way. I know I've started using so almost like say abstraction objects, for want of a better term, but rather than dealing with the Drupal layer directly, having this sort of abstraction layer above that. So if I want to change that to Drupal 8, that should make the porting of that across should be easier. And if using things like repositories, then again we can sort of change the underlying code without affecting too much of the business logic. That might be a way of doing it. But yeah, there's no sort of easy way, I don't think. From there were tools like modular data. I think that did do some automation of 7 to 8, but yeah, I don't know how. I had mixed results. At least when I tried them, that was probably really early on in the process. But yeah, there's not really a simple way, I don't think. That said, the migration tools that do the data migration that are built in, they are really good. So yeah, if you've got you can generate migrations to move your data from 7 to 8 based on what's there in core. So you don't need to write all those from scratch. So that's really good. Yeah, but yeah, no magic button to say, yeah, go from 8 to 9, unfortunately, or 7 to 8, 7 to 8 or 8, 7 to 8 or 7 to 9. Too many numbers, yeah. Hughes, it's interesting. It's a separate project. I'm not sure what you're referring to there. If you're talking about Drush, then yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah, it was about Drush.
Yeah, that's a whole sort of other talk on its own. Like Drush has been around for years and years. There was another project called Drupal Console. Drush was more sort of interacting with your site and the clearing cache and creating users and things. Drupal Console was more of a code generation tool built on sort of Symfony console and Symfony equivalents. So that was, yeah, I want to generate a new controller or a new form, that it would scaffold those out and stuff those out for you. So over time, the sort of two merged into each other, and Drush is sort of modernized and is based on Symfony console now as well, and has its own code scaffolding tools. Console hasn't been updated in a major way for quite a while, but there is also talk of introducing a core CLI as well, which may just be including Drush possibly. But yeah, I'd love to see that too, or maybe even just for the short term, yeah, including Drush in the core recommended project would be a really good sort of step forward. There is a core an issue for that, I believe, which I'm following. Yeah, agree totally. I don't see any more questions unless anybody's got any more.
What about
sorry, I can
benchmarks?
see some over here as well. Any benchmark Drupal 8 to 9 in terms of speed? I don't think about anything official in terms of speed 8 to 9. I've seen some people say it's faster 8 to 9. I guess maybe that's partly based on the PHP version being increased, and if there's less code, and I guess that would run faster, I guess. But yeah, I'm not sure. There's probably a page on Drupal.org for it somewhere. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but I'm sure there has been.
Cool. I think that's everything then, questions-wise.
Yeah. Thanks very much for having me. And yeah, hopefully people won't look at Drupal 8 to 9 projects and run away like we did for previous versions. But,
yeah, thanks for that. That's really, really interesting. I think we'll get straight on to the next talk now. So if Enrico's ready, we'll get going. Hello.
Hi. Hello. Good evening to everyone.
Hello. Yeah, I
can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you. Are you ready to get going then?
Okay, I can start, sure.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
So first of all, thanks to the Leeds PHP group for having me for this presentation. PHP 8 is coming. Good evening to everyone. My name is Enrico Zimwell. I'm a principal software engineer at Elastic. A few notes about me. I'm an old developer. I started my career in 1996. As I said, I work for Elastic, and I'm an open source contributor for many PHP projects, like was the co-author of the framework, Compatibility Expressive, and now I'm the maintainer of Elasticsearch PHP, that is the client to connect to Elasticsearch. I'm also a committee member of a PHP Fig organization. I'm an international speaker, and I'm also a teacher of PHP in a school here in Italy, in Torino, the city where I live. I wrote some books about web programming and secure software. And I'm also the co-founder of the PHP user group of Torino in Italy. This is my Twitter account, it's Zimmer, so you can ping me on Twitter if you want to ask me something. So in this presentation, I used PHP 8 Beta 4 because it has been released 6 days ago, 17th of September. So I run also some benchmark to, to see the differences to compare with the PHP 7. So I will show you in a minute. So before to start, how to install PHP right now. So if you are curious, you want to install PHP 8, you can jump to the Beta 4 version. So basically, this is the in the slides. I will put the slides online after my presentation, and where you see basically the blue text, this is an hyperlink, so you can click on it. And as you can see in PHP 8, there is a couple of file that you can actually download. So basically, when you download the file, you have to compile it because, of course, PHP, this is the source code of PHP, so you need to compile it. So these are the instructions for the Linux environment. So first of all, you have to configure the compiler using some parameters. The most important one here is the prefix. So basically, this is the location where you want to put the binary of the PHP. After that, you need to call make command, and after you need to run sudo make install because the prefix here is /opt/php/php8. So you need sudo permission in order to install it. So after that, you can basically run PHP 8, for instance, from the command line, just running this command. If you need more information, I just put this blog post compiling PHP 8 from source with Git support. This is a very nice blog post, so it will go into the detail how to compile and how to configure your system. So let's talk about the new feature of PHP 8. There are a lot of features. I just put here in the slide some of, in my opinion, the most important feature. For sure, the big news is the introduction of just-in-time compiler, and I will go into the details after this slide. So this is, of course, a big feature because give the opportunity to have a performance speed for some of the PHP application. I will also talk about it later. Another big feature is the introduction of the attributes that are known as annotation in other languages. This is also very useful. Another feature is constructor property promotion. So there is a way basically to simplify the injection of parameters in the constructor when you build an object, basically, with a class. The union types, also a very nice feature. You can specify multiple types for parameters and a return type. The static return type, so now you can have this static operator keyword also in the return of a function, for instance. And the weak maps, a way to create maps with some references, weak references to object. And I will present the details in a while. And last, for this slide, we have the stringable interface. So a way to basically in PHP 8 has been added this interface that is stringable. So every function, every classes that implements a specific function is are under the stringable interface. I will show you later. So let's start with the big news, that is the just-in-time compiler. Okay, so what is a just-in-time compiler? It's a feature of an interpreter that lives at runtime, of course, and is a compiler that instead of interpreting bytecode every time, it basically compiles the bytecode into machine code. So it's like a shortcut, basically. And then invoke this object code instead of the bytecode. So in order to understand what is the just-in-time compiler in the PHP arena, it's mandatory to understand how PHP execute the code. So basically, in this flowchart, the start point is here, the PHP script. So basically, you have your PHP script, you want to execute it. When you pass to the PHP command, basically, the PHP start some steps. The first step is the tokenizing. So basically, it divided the script into simple token. In order to parse, that is the second step of the process. The parse is the step where basically the tokens are constructed under a tree, and we call it this AST, abstract syntax tree. So basically, this is a structure in memory in order to navigate the tree, in order to read actually the meaning of the code. So when you have this abstract syntax tree, the PHP is able to compile it. That basically means it translates the abstract syntax tree into some code that is opcode, that is called opcode. So this is kind of assembler code. So it's very close to the machine, so the assembler of the CPU, but is general in the sense that can be used in using different environment, different CPU, different set of instruction. And this bytecode basically is the same of other languages like, for instance, Java. So when you execute an application in Java, you have the Java virtual machine that also compile it into this object code. And this object code at the end is executed by the Java virtual machine into the CPU. The same is on PHP. So we have the Zen engine, that is the components built by the Zen Technologies companies that basically read the opcode generated by the compiler and execute into the CPU, into the specific set of instruction. So basically, even PHP has the virtual machine that is named Zen engine. So when you say that the PHP code is interpreted languages, means that is interpreted in the sense of the opcode generated is executed step by step. So this is the normal flow of a PHP execution. For instance, imagine that we have this simple piece of code that is just a loop, a for loop that print 100 numbers. If we want to understand what is literally the opcode, we can just generate it. So this is the equivalent of the PHP code at the top of the slide. So basically, if we go inside these languages, we can see that basically there are some lines. In here we have 7 lines numbered from 0 to 6. And we have basically a translation between the PHP code into a kind of assembler code. So for instance, the first instruction is assign CV0 $e int 0. So this is basically the equivalent to say in PHP $e equals 0. After that, the second line is a jump to line 4. So basically this is a jump to the line 4, where we have a condition here. As you can see, there is smaller. So we are comparing the value of $E with the number 100. So basically, this is the part of the conditional part of the for. So basically, we store this comparison into the T1 variable, the line after we jump if not 0. So this jump NZ is basically jump if it's not 0. So we are comparing T1 with L2. So we are jumping to, in the case that basically $E is lower than 100, we are just going into the block of the for cycle, and we are printing here, as you can see, echo $E. And after we are incrementing with the pre-inc the value of $E, so we are jumping here in the for loop, and again we are going back to the condition. So as you can see, it's quite simple to read this piece of code. So the opcode is kind of assembler. But it's general, so it's not related to the CPU code. So the job of the Zen engine, the virtual machine of PHP, is to translate this opcode into a really, assembler, a really instruction that can be executed by a CPU. In order to generate this opcode, we have a command line feature of PHP. So basically, if you run imagine that this for loop is stored into a file that is test.php. You can use this command. Basically, you are enabling the command line, the op cache for the command line interface. You are putting this level of the bug, this number, into the bug level of the op cache. So if you run this command, you will see that you will have as a result basically the opcode generated. So this is very nice feature. You can have some tests in your scenarios in your application just to understand how your PHP code is translated into opcode. Okay, basically now I'm introducing another concept that is op cache. So basically this is a cache for opcode. So basically, the idea is very simple. If we are running for the first time a PHP script, so there is nothing in the cache, so we are going into the same flow of the previous diagram. So basically, we are tokenizing, parsing, compiling. So we are generating basically the opcode. When we have the opcode, we can write it in the cache. So basically, this is the instruction that we added here right into the opcode, and we can execute the virtual machine. The Zen engine can execute the opcode. The second time that we run the same script, if the script has not been modified, so basically there is a simple way to check if a script has been modified just to generating the hash of the source code of the PHP script. So if the hash, for instance, the MD5, using the MD5 function, you just put the content of the script. If the hash is the same, that means nothing has changed in the PHP code. So we can go into the op cache and see, okay, we already have this opcode in cache. Yes, because we did in the previous step. So we can just read the op cache and pass it to the Zen engine. So basically, as you can see, we are completely skipping all that branch. So we are not doing anymore the tokenizing, the parsing, the compiling. So this is a very, very boost of performance. And the op cache is enabled by default starting from PHP 5. So nothing new here. But why I explain how the op cache works? Because basically the just-in-time compiler is a part of the op cache. So when basically the compiler works, so basically when the compiler generate the op cache, there is another component in PHP 8. So this is the part that has been added to with PHP 8. This is the just-in-time compiler that can decide if the code, so for instance, a function, imagine that the compiler is working on a specific function of your project, the just-in-time can decide it according to some configuration that I will show you later, if this piece of code, this function, can be translated directly into machine code. So not opcode, but machine code. Of course, we are also writing this machine code into the OP cache. And if the code is machine code, I can just run it straight to the CPU. I don't need a virtual machine. If it's opcode, basically, I need to, as we did before, to pass to the virtual machine and execute it to the CPU. So the second time, everything is in cache, yes, so I can read the cache. If in the cache there is machine code, again, just go straight to the CPU and execute it. Otherwise, go to the virtual machine. So as you can see, the OP cache, also in this case, it reduces a lot the execution time. And again, it's important to remember that the just-in-time compiler lives in the OP cache part of the core of the PHP. I mentioned this machine code, but I didn't show exactly what means the machine code. So let's jump to the example. So this is the machine code generated by the just-in-time compiler of PHP for the previous example, for the simple for with a print of 100 numbers. So as you can see, there is a lot of code here, and the structure are more atomic. So if you, in your career, you have the opportunity to, smash your mind against, the machine code assembler, these structures are very, very low level. So you are talking about subtraction, comparison, jump, move, for moving, into registers and stuff like that. So as you can see, the number, the list, the length, the size of this source code, even for a simple function like the one that I mentioned, so a simple for loop, is huge. So imagine for a big project. Again, in order to generate this, we have a very nice feature of PHP 8. So you can pass the script that you want to translate into machine code and use these parameters that are enabled CLI, the OP cache. We have a parameter here that is opcache.get with this number 1235, and I will explain in a minute what means. Also, you can specify the memory for the buffer in order to generate machine code. So if you run this from the command line, you will get the get machine code. So this code that I put here in the slide. Okay, so when I explain what is the just-in-time compiler, I say that it works in the same level of the OP cache, but I also mentioned that the Git can understand, can choose if translate the code into machine code or not. But how is possible to the Git? How can decide to do that? There is a configuration, of course. This configuration is named CRTO. It's basically 4-digit with the 4 decimal. For instance, a default value is 1235, and each number corresponds to a specific configuration of the just-in-time compiler. So, for instance, the number 1, that means we want to use the AVX instruction. The AVX are the advanced vector extension, are a specific instruction for the CPU in order to use, specific function for speed improvement. So by default, if you use 1, we say, okay, we want to use this optimization. So the C of the first character of the acronym CRTO is the C is the CPU optimization. So the first number is related to the CPU optimization. The second is the usage of the register allocation. So the R, the second character is the register allocation. So that means we want to use the register. And the register are, if you know how a CPU works, are the lowest memory, the fastest memory that you can have in a computer. So basically, if you're going to use the register, the speed of the, for instance, the cycle of the assignment of number, etc., are of course much faster. So I strongly suggest to leave 2 here as options. The number 3 is the triggering function. So basically, you can specify when the just-in-time compiler must have to translate piece of code function into machine code. And the try means number 3 means basically that the just-in-time compiler will provide profiling on the fly and compiling auth function. So basically means you try to understand what are the auth functions. So the auth function means the functions that are being called more frequently. And for this specific function, they will basically translate it into machine code. So it's a kind of profile at runtime on the fly. The last configuration is the optimization level. The number 5 means type inference and procedure analysis. So this is kind of specific optimization for auto profiling and how to trigger, how to improve the performance of the just-in-time compiler. The most important feature for the Git, in my opinion, is the triggering. In the sense that this is the most configurable options that you can have, because basically here you are saying, okay, I want decide how the just-in-time compiler will work on my piece of code. So for instance, if you put 0 for the triggering, all the function on the first script load will be converted into machine code. If you put 1 in this configuration, the Git function on the first execution will be translated into machine code. 2 is profile on the first request and compile auth function on the second request. So basically, as you can see, there are a lot of different scenarios where you can trigger the execution of your just-in-time compiler. The number 3, already mentioned, is the profile on the fly and compile auth function. And the number 4 is very interesting. So basically give you the possibility to specify into the source code of your application if a function, for instance, can be used by the just-in-time compiler. So if you put in the doc comments of a function in the PHP doc @git using this specific tag, you are basically communicating to the just-in-time compiler to say, look, I want this function to be converted into machine code. So imagine that you have a function in your application that is very CPU intensive, that do a lot of elaboration. Maybe that's a good candidate for using a just-in-time compiler and putting this tag into this function. Remember, if you want to use this feature, you need to put the number 4 as a trigger for the just-in-time. I did a benchmark comparing the advantages of the just-in-time compiler with the PHP 7.4 against PHP 8. So I used 7.4.10, and for PHP 8, of course, I used the latest version, that is the beta 4. As you can see, this graph represents the execution time of a script. That is a benchmark file that you can have a look into the source code of the PHP. So basically in the PHP, under the Zend folder, there is this file bench.php. So it's a benchmark file that does a lot of execution, a lot of iteration, memory allocation, associative array, object, stuff like that. So it's just a benchmark to analyze the performance of the language itself. So I put the execution time here in second of this script. So if I'm using PHP 7.4, you can see that the execution time is something between 0.3 and 0.35 seconds without the op cache. If you run the same script with the op cache, as you can see, there is almost the half of execution time, so double of the speed, even because basically after the second execution, everything is already in memory. So PHP 7.4 can just execute So basically, this is where you can see basically that the majority of the execution time for a PHP script is driven by the tokenizing, the parsing, and the compiling phase. Okay, so this is 7.4. If we jump to PHP 8 beta 4 without the upcache, if we compare with the PHP 7.4, you can see that is a little bit better. So PHP 8 is faster if you compare with PHP 7 a little bit. If you enable the upcache, it's basically the same of PHP 7.4. Is almost the same because the idea is the same. So we are caching something in the memory. So we are skipping basically the parsing, the tokenizing, and the compilation phase. But the good news is that if you enable the Git, the just-in-time compiler with the configuration 1, 2, 3, 5. Of course, I just did this, default configuration. You can do more benchmark if you are curious. Basically is 1/3 of the execution time. So it's something like 0.1 second compared with the first 0.35. It's a lot. So this big improvement is because, again, this benchmark is just a benchmark for the languages. So basically, there are a lot of for loop, memory allocation, associative array, pointer object, function, mathematical function, and stuff like that. That's why there is this big, improvement here. But again, it's a very good news, and also it's a very good news the fact that we are going to a major version that is PHP 8, and we still have some micro improvement on the performance itself. Because if we compare PHP 8 with PHP 7 without any strategies of application, etc., we can see that the language itself is faster. So this is very, very good news because it's not so straightforward it's not so simple to say, okay, we are adding more feature because PHP 8 we have more feature than PHP 7, and again we are, improving the performance. So this is in a software. In any software, this is not coming for free. So this is a big thanks, a big effort for the PHP core developer that put into this PHP 8. So I strongly suggest to say thank you for this because this is kind of amazing. If you are curious more about this benchmark, I created a specific report for this. So here, basically, in this gist, I put all the information, how I run the PHP 7.4, which command I used, how I run PHP 8, how much time, how much test I did, how I took the average, and blah, blah, blah. So you can have a look at all the details if you are curious. Okay. But we are web developers mainly because we are using PHP. So we are very interested in to see if the just-in-time compiler can help standard PHP application like WordPress, for instance. So this is a test that I found on internet. I put the source in the slide, so I didn't did this. Basically, with the PHP 8 without the just-in-time compiler, a standard WordPress application can do more or less 119 requests per second. If we use the just-in-time compiler with the default configuration of the CTRO 1235, the requests per second are lower. So basically, we are going down, and the number is 160 requests per second. If we are triggering, if we are trying to change the configuration of the just-in-time compiler, we can reach basically the same level of the first results. So without any, just-in-time compiler involvement. So basically, that means that. By the way, this is the source of this where you can find this benchmark. This means basically that the just-in-time compiler, it seems not so helpful, not so useful for standard web application. Why? Because a standard web application is input-output bound, is not CPU bound. So in a standard web application, you have a lot of execution of HTTP requests, database connection, and stuff like that. So it's not a typical CPU critical application. If you are developing something to manage, I don't know, images, or doing a lot of elaboration, for instance, you are using machine learning libraries or stuff like that, statistics, you will have for sure some improvement using the just-in-time compiler, because these are, CPU intensive application. But if you are just, for instance, using a WordPress with any, specific CPU, plugin or whatever, that's basically, you will have no advantages to run the just-in-time compiler. So, long story short, the just-in-time compiler is useful only for CPU-intensive application. If you have input-output bound application, you don't have any help on this. But this is quite obvious. I mean, the just-in-time compiler runs improve the performance of mainly for the CPU. Okay, let's jump to another topics, that is the attributes. So basically, as I mentioned, the attributes are kind of annotation. So it's a way to add metadata to PHP code. So imagine you have classes, properties, method, function, and you want to add some metadata. Before of the attributes, before PHP 8, we usually have a PHP doc. So there are a lot of projects that use PHP doc. So basically, you put a comment before a classes, before a property, a function, whatever, and you put some, tag. For instance, there is famous project PHP Stan for static analysis of PHP code base, where you put some information on the PHP doc, so the PHP Stan can read this information and do the analysis, basically. So the idea is to have something similar, but in the core of PHP. The syntax in order to use the attribute is that one. So basically, you have hash, open square bracket, so you can have a string, in this case, attribute, and you have close square bracket. So this is the syntax. There was a lot of discussion about the syntax, actually, about the attributes, because the first release used of the attribute used another syntax, but there was some problem for other projects. So after a while, and you can, if you are curious, you can read the last request for comment about the short-term syntax. Anyway, there was a lot of discussion. At the end, they decided to use this, and actually, this is quite good in my opinion, because basically this is just a comment. As you know, in PHP, you can have a comment using also the hash, even if it's not that used, but is actually a comment. So basically, this will replace metadata that other project, like for instance Symfony. In a Symfony application, if you want to specify the root of, so you are any controller, you are building a controller, you want to say, okay, look, this is the root of /home. So this, when user, the URL coming is /home, this is the piece of code to be executed, basically. You have to write, you have to put this comment inside the PHP doc block. If we have attributes in PHP 8, we can use it because it's part of the core of the language. So we don't need anymore another parsing layer in order to extract this information into source code, because everything is in the core itself. So it's a very convenient way to do it. Let's see an example talking about the custom attributes. So what is a custom attribute? It's basically a simple classes annotated with the hash attribute. Here there is an example. Imagine that we are managing an application based on some events, and we want to use a class that is listened to, so something that listens to a specific event. So this is very simple class. As you can see, there is only one parameter in the constructor. That is a string, and we just put in this public property event the parameter. So if we have a class and we want to say, look, I want to listen for a specific function of that class, for instance, a product subscriber, we have a onProduct created. So this function, we want to have a way to annotate that this function should be listened to. So basically, that means that we want to listen for this execution on product created. We can put, as you can see, the attributes here before of the function, and we can see use the class that we built in the previous slides and pass, for instance, the class name that we want to listen. That is by the way, the same passed to the onProduct created. The same for another function that is onProduct deleted. So if we annotate, if you use these attributes in this PHP code, basically we can use the reflection, that is a standard class for PHP, in order to introspect a class, an object, in order to extract all the information, like the functions, the PHP doc block, and now we have also the attributes. So because in PHP we have the attributes, so as you can see here, we are just saying, okay, we want to reflect the class that is product subscriber. So basically the class that I show in the previous slide. And we are iterating again all the methods. So we are getting all the methods basically. For each methods, we are getting the attributes, and we are only interested in the specific kind of attributes, because I didn't mention, but you can have a multiple here definition of more than one attributes. So you can separate in a different line and have, I don't know, hash, open square bracket, and another, attributes, and so on. So you can, when you introspect, when you use the reflection, you can say, look, I'm interested only in the attributes that are listens to. So that are specific with this name, basically. So basically, we are extracting only this specific listen to. So we are iterating, and we are getting into this object $attr. And as you can see here, we have a very nice feature that is new instance. So basically, we can say, look, I don't want just the name of the attribute. I want the instance. So please make an instance of the annotation of the attributes. So an instance here basically is a class, the class listen to. So will be an object of the class listen to with this parameter that is product created class. So this is basically a string. So if we var dump, for instance, the first instance, we will see that is an object of listen to, and the event is the product created, because we annotated the product created here, and because the event is the name of the property of the listen to. So this is actually a very, very nice feature of the attributes, because as you can see, with the standard PHP reflection methods, we will have a new get attributes and also new instance here, in order to get the real object already instantiated with the parameter that we specified into the attributes. So I think it's very, very interesting, and I'm sure this will open a lot of new scenario and possibility for even for framework user, framework developer. I'm more than convinced that this will be a very nice feature to use it. I mentioned the attribute. Actually, there is a new reflection attribute class in PHP 8. So basically, you can get the name, the arguments, or the new instance, the one that I mentioned in my example. Okay, so there are some work in process, some discussion around the attributes, because there will be very nice to have some custom, some built-in attributes already in language. For instance, the deprecated. Imagine that we can use hash deprecated attributes to trigger a deprecated error using annotation. This is very nice, because imagine that you can write something like this. You have a code base, you want to deprecate a function. The only things that you have to do is just to put the annotation deprecated, and maybe you can add a custom message, for the deprecation. And this actually will execute a deprecated message with the message that you specified here. So this will be very, very useful in order to deprecate some function directly into the code. Another, for instance, will be to use to enable the just-in-time. I mentioned that now the just-in-time compiler works if you put the @get PHP doc into the comment. Will be nice to have the same for annotation. So I can annotate using, for instance, something like git in order to specify that I want to use the just-in-time compiler for a specific function, and so on. So I'm sure we will see more of this in the future. Again, there are a lot of discussion, but I didn't see an official release yet for using this built-in attributes, even because they just introduced the short syntax recently. So I will expect some change in the future. Okay, another nice feature is, especially for lazy people like me, is the constructor property promotion. So this is not big feature, but very, very useful. So the idea is very simple. You have a class in a constructor, and I know you are familiar with this. So basically, you need to pass some parameter. You want to store in a public or private or protected properties of the class, this parameter you have to do manually. So basically you have to specify the parameters, and you have to write $this, name of the parameter, and put everything here. So this is quite standard for PHP 7 or 5. Imagine that you can promote the constructor of the properties into basically just specifying that the constructor, in the constructor you specify that, for instance, the three parameter $x, and z are just public and float using this syntax. So basically we are adding the public into the constructor here. So this is the equivalent of the previous slide. So if you write this in PHP 8, so if you add just public, for instance, in the first parameter of the constructor, this is the same of doing this. This is very convenient because we reduce the number of lines that we need to in order to accomplish initialization of some parameter. There are some rules, of course. You can use this promotion of property only in constructors. You cannot have a duplicate for properties, so you cannot have something that is mixed in the promotion and subject that is specified, as a property with the same name. Of course, you cannot have duplicate. Untyped properties are allowed, of course, but so basically you can even not specify. For instance, if you go back here, you can even not specify the type. So you can just say public $x without float. You can do that. But because we are good developer, we want to use typing. So I strongly suggest to use type for the properties. You can combine promoted and normal properties. Of course, if you don't specify, for instance, public properties, this will be the same as the same of PHP 7. If you put public, this will be promoted. So you can have a mix, situation here. And of course, you can access promoted properties from the body of the constructor, of course, because it's the same of specifying manually, assign manually the parameters to the internal, to the properties of the class. If you are curious, there is a very, very nice blog post about all the possible combination use cases of this promotion of properties. This blog post is by Brent Roos, and I strongly suggest to have a look at it. Very, very good PHP developer. Another interesting feature actually is the union types. So this is very simple but very powerful. So basically the idea is that you can specify multiple type for a variable. So imagine that you have a property that is private in this case. You want to specify that $number can accept integer or float. You can use, using this pipe separator. This is the equivalent to say, okay, this can be integer or float. And you can use this also, of course, in parameters. For instance, we have this function public set number. $number can be integer or float, and even on the results. So if you have a function that can sometime can return an integer or sometime a float, you can specify integer or float. Again, not so sexy feature, but very, very useful because this can simplify some scenarios where you have, some parameters that can have both types, and integer and float is a perfect example here. Another interesting addition on PHP 8 is the static return type. So basically, we had static as a name that you can use in a class. So for instance, you can have return new static. This is even possible on PHP 7, but was not possible to have static in the return type of a function, for instance. And imagine this example. You have a class A, just a constructor with some parameter, and you have a function that create new static, so new instances of this class. And you can specify static here. We have a class B that extend class A. So we are creating an object of the class B, and we are executing the create function, passing a couple of parameter. And this basically, because we have static here, the results in $results will be an object of B, because static means, in this case, an object of B. And in order to do that on PHP 7, you should have, for instance, put here A, so the name of the class, of if the class implements some interface. A lot of people use interface here in order to specify that I want to create, something of this kind of interface. But again, if you put A here in this example, will be, difficult, because basically class B extend A, but you are creating a class A, but you want B, and etc. So as you can see, static return type will solve a lot of issue, and especially if you are using Fluent interfaces. This is a perfect example. Imagine that you are a fan of Fluent interfaces. There are even here a lot of discussion in the PHP community. A lot of people say, no, don't use Fluent interfaces because there are some pros and cons. But imagine that you have some Fluent interfaces. Now you can just specify static here instead of putting, the name of the class. So we will have better code, because you can you don't have to change, if you extend something, the name of the return type of the type. Again, this will simplify a lot of scenarios. Okay. We have another interesting feature. This is a new feature of PHP 8, the introduction of weak maps. So what are the weak maps? Are kind of a map to object. So imagine that you want to create a map of objects where the reference is weakly. That means if you delete the object, the source of the object, even the map will be deleted. is an example. PHP offer a new class that is weak map. So we are creating an object here, $map. And we are putting inside this map an object. So we are creating a standard class. And as you can see, this is a kind of a syntax of an associative array. So where the index is the object here. And, I was saying that the index of the map is the object itself, and we can put I don't know, some value, for instance, number 42. If we var dump $map, we will see that $map is an object of weak map, of course, that has one element that is an array with the key that is object standard class, because $obj is a standard class, and the value is 42. So if we if we remove the object using, for instance, the unset feature of PHP, so we are unsetting $obj. $obj was the references inside the weak map, and we try to var dump again $map, we will see that weak map is empty. Why? Because weak map create a weekly reference to the $object. So if you delete the $object, the specific map into the weak map will be deleted as well. And actually, this is a very nice feature. Imagine that you want to create a caching system, for instance. You can use a weak map for this caching system. So basically, each time someone will delete the object that you put in the weak map, automatically the weak map will delete the object for you. So this is actually a very, very nice feature, because you don't have to record anymore the fact that an object has been deleted, so you need to update the cache itself by code. This is done automatically by the weak map. So imagine that you have get a function, for instance, here get something with caching. You specify the object, and you can just say, okay, I'm just returning the execution of this procedure that is something expensive, and I'm storing into the cache itself. That is a weak map. I'm using here, if you're not familiar of this syntax, question mark, equal. This is the null caching assignment that has been introduced in PHP 7.4. So in one line, basically, you are creating a caching system, and you are also creating an automatically invalidation system for the caching. Because again, if you delete the object itself, the weak map, the key in the weak map will be deleted. So you don't need to care about invalidate the cache anymore. And this is very, very nice feature. The last new feature that I would like to talk briefly about PHP 8 is the Stringable Interface. This is very simple. So basically, PHP 8 introduced this new interface that is stringable, that, as you can see, have just one function, underscore to string, that returns a string, of course. So basically, each class of your code base that implements, that has this underscore to string function implemented, and this is quite used function in order to stringify an object, it will automatically add the stringable interface. Why? Because in this way, if you want to check if something is stringable, so can be represented as a string, you have just to ask if the class, the object, is an instance of stringable, because PHP 8 provides for you this automatically addition of a stringable interface if you have the underscore to string in your code base. And this is quite nice, because it's a fast and more elegant way to check if an object can be string converted into string or not. Again, nothing super exciting, but very, very useful. So as I hope I give you an overview about this this feature, but all the features are not, apart from the just-in-time compiler, that is a big news of the PHP 8. All the others are minor improvement, but very specific, especially for professional people. So that's very important, because in the last years, we saw that, you know, in the PHP releases, they started to add the specific feature, of course, like, you know, the type properties, the return, all this kind of feature are in the path to improve the language to be more, you know, enterprise ready, even if I don't really like this sentence. Because the majority of the other, you know, languages, they have all these, you know, capabilities. So now we have also in PHP. So this is a very good signal, in my opinion, because PHP now can, you know, have the same, you know, usability and the same powerful as a language of other language in the market. So this is very important. The last slide is about the release date. So now we are waiting for the first release candidate one, because now we have the beta 4. And after that, there will be the release candidate one, the 1st of October. And PHP 8 will be available, so the general availability release will be the 26th of November. So very close. We are very close to the stable release of PHP 8. Again, the PHP core team is doing an incredible job in order to, you know, respect this release date. If you go to the specific page for the release date in the php.net, you can see that we started this June, the 25th of June, and we respect all, you know, the release from Alpha 1, Alpha 2, Alpha 3, feature freeze. Now we are in Beta 4. We are waiting for the first release candidate, but everything was simple, perfect. So a huge thanks to the internal core of PHP and the release manager for doing this incredible job. Okay, I put a lot of references here. If you are interested, you can you go into the details for some of the features that I mentioned, and most of these are people that are core developers, like, you know, Nikita Popov, for instance, one of the, you know, stronger PHP core contributor at the moment. So you can literally go into the details of everything. So thank you for your attention. Again, this is my Twitter account, it's Zimmer, if you want to ask me on Twitter. And I also encourage to subscribe to the meetup of the Leeds PHP. And thank you again, Leeds PHP, for having me to this presentation.
Cool, thank you, Enrico. We'll just give it a minute, see if anyone's got any questions on the chat. But yeah, cheers for that. It's really interesting to see some of the new things that are coming in PHP 8. Some of it looks really cool.
Yeah.
Especially around things like the attributes, which have kind of been, people have been doing them unofficially for quite a while, and it's interesting to see.
Yes, absolutely. I really look forward to use it. And by the way, Lorna was a friend of mine, of very old friend, so we met a lot of time, and Swingable looks pretty good. Yes, I agree, Lorna. It's very, very nice also feature.
Lorna's also just asked, actually, with the union feature, can I union a nullable type, or is there another way to indicate something that might be null or empty?
Actually, we have also the question mark for, you know, for the null. So I see a better way to accept null instead of putting, you know, as a type null.
Oh, yeah, you can do it in the return type, can't you? You can stick a question mark. Is it?
Yes, yes.
Before it, yeah. Yeah, I've used that a couple of times before. Okay, I can't see any more questions coming in. But yeah, thank you for that. Thanks to both speakers for tonight. If anyone has any talks that they'd like to contribute, please let me know for future events. The best way to do that's on either Twitter, on my own Twitter, which is @HughNoble, or on the Leeds PHP Twitter. or to info@leedsphp.org. Oh, there's another question just coming actually. Attributes as a first class thing is great, but what's the performance like using reflections like that? Does the improved caching help?
Actually, because it's in the core itself, it's much faster than the approach of the PHP docs, the old approach. Of course, this is something that you do. You can improve it with using a cache. But again, this is something that you do usually for introspect the code in order to, I don't know, putting some routing system. So I see, of course, using the cache in order to improve, from the second execution again. But it should be faster than the previous approach for sure. So
great.
It's an improvement.
Yeah, thanks for that then. So we'll pop over now. We'll end this main track now, and if anyone wants to stay around, we'll keep the social tab open. So if you just click up on that social tab at the top on the big orange heart platform, and we'll stick around there for a bit for anyone who wants to chat for a bit. And we'll see you next time in October for the next meetup. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.